everybody. So we're going to talk about lease owner operators. Leased owner operators are owner operators who don't own their truck. They lease a truck. These are like lease programs that companies offer their drivers. Uh, Now compare that to what Crete does. Crete doesn't, you don't lease a truck from Crete. You buy the truck from Crete. Just like you buy a Chevy Silverado, you buy a Freightliner Cascadia. So there's a big difference. Obviously, when you purchase a truck, like here at Crete, you own the truck. You got to make truck payments, but if you want to modify the truck or put on a grill guard or APU, you could do that. You make your own decisions about the maintenance of the truck. You decide what tires to put on it, how you're going to operate it, when you're going to operate it, things like this. Conversely, if you lease a truck, you don't own that truck. The company that you leased it from owns that truck. It could be the carrier that you're driving for. It could be some other carrier. It could be a company that has trucks available for lease. Like I think Mountain Leasing or something like that is a common one. And then what happens is you pay that lease monthly, and then at the end of the lease, there's a balloon payment. And you either pay that payment or you turn the truck in and you lease another truck. Then let's say you're leasing a brand new truck. Well, by the time that end of that lease, there's a balloon payment of $80,000 if you want to keep that truck or more. So it's a situation where you never really own that truck. And when you take it in for maintenance, you don't decide what maintenance is done. The company you lease from decides what maintenance is going to be done. So if you go to Freightliner, you can't authorize Freightliner to do repairs. They got to get authorization from the leasing company. A lot of times I go to Freightliner and, there's a Schneider guy there, and the Schneider owner-operator can't make decisions on truck repairs. They got to get permission from Schneider. Whereas I go in there and I tell them I'm the one paying it. I own the truck, so I'm the one that makes the decision. So this is a difference between owning a truck and leasing the truck. You're a small business owner. You want as much decision making in your hands as possible. When you lease a truck, a lot of the decision making is taken out of your hands. So another thing with leasing is a lot of these companies are predatory. They target drivers who have bad credit or not enough money for a down payment, but they can get into a lease. So you think about the guys who are company drivers who are struggling. They want to become owner operators, but maybe they don't have the business skills, or they don't have good credit. They're like they're probably at risk of financial distress of some kind. And then they see these opportunities to jump in a truck with no money, for a lease, and then they pay outrageous amount for these lease, and they never own the truck. And then at the end of the lease, they still have no money. They don't have a truck, and it's an endless cycle of debt. It's kind of getting towards slavery. So there's a lot of abuse there with these lease programs, and there is legislation working its way through Congress to make this program illegal in the U.S. When you look at California AB 5, for example, the state law to make it illegal to become independent contractors, a lot of that originated from the port truckers who are leasing from the port their equipment. and they were doing drayage, back and forth from the port to the warehouses. And when they got done with the lease, they figured out these guys were actually losing money by leasing the truck. So California AB5 was part of the reasoning for the law was to target those bad actors that were preying on these port workers, these drivers who were hauling the loads back and forth from the port. They were operating under lease agreements, so they wanted to protect the drivers from these companies that were predatory. Now, the Supreme Court said you could do that in California, but you can't do it nationwide. So lease programs, they sound, like a lot of things in trucking. They sound great. The advertising, the promotion, the sell features of it is like a worry-free truck. You don't have to worry about maintenance. You don't have to worry about paying for truck repairs. It's all under the lease. Oh, okay. But say for example, you could buy a truck and typically your truck payment may be $3,000 per month, but at least you own the truck. A lease could be much higher than that, and you still don't own the truck. I've seen guys actually lease a truck from Schneider and then run at Crete as an owner operator. I was like, wow, that's kind of unique. I've never seen that before. I've talked to guys who are at Schneider who lease their trucks. Now, of all the lease programs out there, Schneider might be the better one, as far as leases go. Guys could jump into a brand new truck, they pay the lease, they work off a load board, and then at the end of 3 years, they decide whether they want to buy that truck or turn in and get another one. Now, the guys at Schneider seem to like their lease program. They seem to like it. If they make money and they're profitable, who am I to say, that's a bad business model? But for every company out there like Schneider who is somewhat successful with their lease program, there are hundreds of others who are not, and this really muddies the water for the driver who says, well, I heard lease programs are bad, but then, they look at something like Schneider and it says, well, that one's good, so maybe this one's good. It's like, well, if anything, Schneider may be the exception to the rule. The guys at Schneider like it, and it would be a shame if there's a program that drivers like became illegal. I mean that would remove a choice that the drivers would have. It would remove an option. It would be less freedom to decide for yourself what do you want. What you want to buy a truck, you want to lease a truck. But if it's a small company and they have a lease program that's designed to benefit the company, it's not there to benefit the driver. They're like, well, we can get the driver into a truck, as a lease operator. It's had all kinds of problems. If you study the history of these lease programs and the drivers, the horror stories, the worst of the worst, the stories that says they went bankrupt leasing truck. I would say the old Cascadia 125, when you buy it, the truck repairs were outrageous, but at least now it comes with a warranty. So with a warranty, I think you're better off buying the truck, not leasing the truck. But like at Schneider, if you lease a truck, you get into a brand new truck. If you go to buy a truck, you're probably going to be looking at a truck with 300 to 400,000 miles on it. So it's not brand new. Occasionally, an owner operator will buy a truck brand new. They're fortunate enough to be in a position to do that. But by and large, most owner operators at Crete buy a truck at Crete that already has 400,000 miles on it. But with a new warranty, that goes all the way up to 750,000 miles. So it's still a better deal to buy the truck than it is to lease the truck. And then if you ever wanted to sell the truck, it has some value to it. Whereas a lease, you just walk away from the lease. That if you can, sometimes you can't. It's like if you're stuck in that lease, there may not be a way to get out of it. You may realize that it's a bad lease and that you're losing money or you're barely getting by, and you can't get out of it until the end of the lease. So these are things to watch out for. If you talk to other drivers, which I highly recommend, they'll tell you stay away from them lease programs. That's a bad deal. Bad deal. Don't do it. You're gonna regret it. Now, if you're at Schneider, those guys seem to like it. But I think they're the exception, not the rule. And then there is going to be legislation from all indications are that legislation will probably pass, and then these programs will be a thing of the past. So that the only way you can become an owner operator is if you buy your truck. So then you're going to be responsible for maintaining the truck as well. So the guys at Schneider will adapt. They may not like it, but they'll make the adaptation. Other companies like Lone Mountain, who specialize in lease, have to start selling trucks instead of leasing trucks. So that's one of the dangers in the industry. You need to be aware of before you decide to purchase a truck. It's like you see that lease program and it looks good. You talk to guys and they'll tell you don't do it. That is a big mistake. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.